Um, Basically, I need the police and the ambulance and that because I've killed 4 people.
On the night of September 18th, 2021, a horrific quadruple murder shook the village of Killamarsh, Derbyshire. 4 innocent lives were brutally taken. 35-year-old Terry Harris, her children including 13-year-old John Paul and 11-year-old Lacey, and Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent. The perpetrator would later reveal a chilling calmness and calculated deceit. But what led to this unspeakable act of violence? Was it a preventable tragedy enabled by systemic failures and missed opportunities? Today we examine the disturbing case of Damien Bendall, a convicted murderer and rapist, and the devastating consequences of his actions. Damien Bendall, born in 1990 in Wiltshire, England, he was a violent criminal who was emboldened and let loose due to the incompetence of authorities. Born into a disorganized family, Bendall was known for his drug dealing and naughty behavior. He was a fantasist and had a history of animal abuse, which is often considered a warning sign for future delinquent aggression. Bendall also targeted racial minorities in his neighborhood, claiming to be a senior official in the Aryan Brotherhood. Drug abuse was another major issue in Bendall's life, and he began abusing cocaine and heroin as a teenager. In 2010, police detected cocaine on him, but he continued to commit crimes. Bendall allegedly attacked an Asian man, causing him to be rendered unconscious. The victim recalled Bendall making racist remarks and repeatedly beating him. Bendall was sentenced to 3 years in jail on June 30th, 2011. After being released from prison in August 2012, he appeared to avoid running afoul of the law for a while. Yet this does not imply that he had a permanent alteration. It is now known that during their time together, he had begun abusing a lady who was too terrified to report what was happening to her for fear that Bendall would murder her if he found out. But he was never able to avoid trouble for very long. On June 7, 2015, he entered a news store owned by Narendra Patel, a 62-year-old man. Narendra recalled how Bendall had acted strangely as he walked back. Bendall went back and forth throughout the store, making several phone calls and purchasing some cold beverages while frequently staring out the window. He abruptly displayed a 6-inch knife at the counter and made a demand for cash and cigarettes from the victim. Luckily, Narendra was protected by a golf stick behind the counter. He attempted to attack Bendall with it. Bendall ran away from police, but then gave up. On August 21, 2015, he was sentenced to 3 further years in jail. However, Bendall became more aggressive and violent while he was in jail. His plea to transfer to a different prison was turned down in the beginning of 2016. He was so incensed by this that he plotted for months how to exact revenge on the jail officials. He assaulted a jail guard on May 10, 2016, knocking him unconscious and necessitating surgery. Bendall's unbridled rage during his incarceration caused harm to 2 more officers who attempted to assist him. His former partner informed the probation agency of his violent nature. She asked to have his contact information blocked, to be informed when he was set to be released, and if she could get a restraining order. Her new partner also got in touch with probation services 2 days later, stating that more needed to be done to keep her safe. The fear that he would pursue her once he escaped terrified the victim. On October 31, 2018, Bendall was released from prison. Nevertheless, he misbehaved and disregarded the conditions of his parole. He disobeyed orders, skipped curfew, and drank alcohol on the authorized property where he was lodging. Thus, he was returned to prison on November 28, 2018. He remained there until August 9, 2019, at which point he was once more freed without the need for probation. He told his probation officer that he had met a woman he intended to live with after the end of his sentence at this time, but the worst was still to come. Bendall's deviation only got worse after he was released from jail once more. In May 2020, Bendall developed a sexual interest in youngsters. Wiltshire police were informed that Bendall was attempting to establish a close relationship with a 16-year-old foster girl. The teenager had escaped, despite the police's best efforts to warn him to stay away from him. He had apparently moved on by then, attempting to initiate sex with younger girls. Bendall was deemed a high risk. Even the cops were concerned he would begin abusing them. Although the probation service was informed of this by the police, The information was not utilized at the appropriate time. This egregious mistake on the part of the probation agency was later publicly denounced, demonstrating the risk that individuals such as Bendel might provide. Bendel would entice them by making them feel special, but then reveal how terrifying he truly was. Since the women were under his control and too afraid to go, by that point, it was frequently too late. This is how Bendel and Terry Harris, a 35-year-old single mother of two, got together. In March 2020, after 14 years of dating Jason Bennett, Terry had broken up with him and they met on a dating app. Two children of Terry, Lacey and John Paul, were raised by Jason. Terry had a strong affection for Bendel, and the two moved in together within a few months, sharing a home in the village of Killamarsh, which is close to Sheffield. However, Bendel had two hidden reasons for moving in with Terry, as psychopaths frequently do. He might firstly be nearer to her and have easier control over her. Secondly, while the cops were searching for him, he could dodge them. Unaware of this, Terry greatly liked Bendel, but her family and friends were concerned. Bendel enjoyed boasting about his criminal history and his current state of flight from law enforcement. Terry's friend reported that Bendel was acting strangely and seemed excited, almost like he was searching for trouble. Bendel smoked a lot of cannabis, and individuals who knew him said that depending on whether he had taken drugs, he had two different personalities. He would boast about his boxing prowess, brag about fighting with people, and talk about his period spent in jail in July 2020. Bendel informed Terry's mom about a friend's unwell puppy. He'd taken a break because his pal couldn't afford to take it to the vet. Bendel struck the dog around the head, killing it. Terry had shown her mother his knuckle duster when Bendel left. Additionally, he used Terry's money to buy drugs and drink because he didn't want to work. Angie Smith, Terry's mother, believed Bendel was dominating her daughter. Terry often gave off the impression of being tense around Bendel, as if she was worried about saying the wrong thing. Angie claimed that although she had always been a tomboy, she would always wear low-cut blouses and tight shorts when she went out with him. Her hair turned a vibrant red. In addition to preventing Terry from seeing her mother and friends, Bendel seemed to be dragging her about. Terry was in love with Bendel. Bendel's behavior didn't improve even though Terry got pregnant. He became even meaner and more violent. He falsely accused Terry of regularly cheating on him. Terry started taking her initial measures to escape Bendel since she could no longer stand this terrible treatment. Bendel was so insanely enraged that even the neighbors could hear his yelling and cursing. At that moment, in May 2021, when things were at their worst, Bendel was ultimately apprehended by the authorities. Bendel was taken to court on June 9, 2021. He was arrested and had to face the consequences. Then he was granted a curfew and a suspended prison sentence. This meant that he would have to abide by certain regulations, but would not have to immediately go to prison. It is shocking that Terry and her kids were let to live with this violent man once more. 3 months later, a terrible crime shocked Britain. This case was very disturbing and worrying. We investigated and found that the probation service failed to properly supervise Damien Bendel. From his first report to his community supervision, they didn't do their job well. We found mistakes made by probation officers and their managers, but these mistakes showed a bigger problem. The probation service struggles to assess and manage risks posed by offenders to the public, children, and partners. On September 18, 2021, late in the evening, Bendel was at home with Terry and her two kids, Lacey and John Paul. The kids were preparing for sleep. Unfortunately, there was yet another child present, Connie Gent, an 11-year-old who had come over for a sleepover, and he was Lacey's best friend. Bendel subsequently stated that he was looking to get more cocaine, having used it for 3 days at this time. Bendel attacked all 4 of the occupants of the house with a claw hammer. The precise sequence of events leading up to this is unknown. Everyone perished in a different room after he struck them repeatedly in the head with such intensity and brutality that their skulls were shattered. This indicates that as the attack began, everyone fled in an attempt to protect themselves. Bendel searched every room in search of them. The entire house was covered in blood. The next thing Bendel did was almost too horrific to be true. He sexually assaulted 11-year-old Lacey in the bedroom where her expectant mother's body was found after beating her nearly to death. Following her initial attack, and as she was dying from her horrific head wounds, Lacey was attacked once again. When he was finished, he killed her by applying pressure on her neck. She lived the last few minutes of her childhood in extreme pain. Bendel spent several hours sitting with the bodies after that. He changed his clothing several times, but he made no attempt to tidy the place. Later, he was captured on camera, bringing an Xbox game console that belonged to John Paul in a bag. He exchanged this game console for drugs and got a cab. Additionally, he was observed entering a corner store without appearing agitated or anxious. About 12 hours after the murders, Bendel eventually called the police, demonstrating a level of psychopathy that can leave one speechless with horror.
Basically, I need the police and the ambulance and that because I've killed 4 people.
Okay, just hold the line.
He took this action in an attempt to steer the narrative and provide his version of events first. He said that, "I have killed 4 people, so basically I need the police and the ambulance right now." Bendel additionally made a feeble attempt to stab himself in self-harm. He attempted to make it appear as though he was so angry with himself for what he had done that he had attempted suicide. But all that was left were minor stab wounds to his belly and chest. Police came and started interrogating. "Are there any weapons here? Do you have anything that you shouldn't have?"
Happened to you now, mate?
Well, I know it's going to happen when you go to prison, obviously, but again,
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
yeah,
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
He informed the officers that the entire house was covered in blood. "With a hammer I worked. I was unaware of what I had done. I've killed 4 individuals. I have no idea why I went dark. I felt as though I was not in my body." In addition, he made care to inform them that he had been high on narcotics for the previous few days and was unable to recall anything. However, despite his attempts at justification, this nasty and vicious man could not resist boasting about his accomplishments. Bendel was accused of 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempting to evade the full repercussions of his acts after his capture. First of all, he said he couldn't remember killing anyone since he was so high on drugs. In addition, he wouldn't acknowledge that he had abused Lacey. This was most likely due to his knowledge of the jail procedures for child sex offenders. Bendel made a manslaughter plea deal. This would be acknowledging that he killed all 4 victims while denying any intention to do so. This offer was turned down by the court. Bendel was easily shown to be lying. Despite his inability to recall the killings, he claimed he was still able to use the game console to go into town and get drugs. And he waited for hours on end before phoning for assistance. He was cool and collected, behaving as though he had done something trivial when the cops came. At Derby Crown Court on December 21st, 2021, Bendel realized he couldn't continue lying. He entered a guilty plea to 1 charge of rape and 4 counts of murder. He appeared before Mr. Justice Sweeney, KC, that same afternoon to receive his punishment. Bendel's attorney made a desperate attempt to win people over by claiming that Bendel had changed his mind about his actions. In his sentencing remarks, the judge expressed his disbelief, stating that the murders were savage and cruel. The fact that Bendel had murdered defenseless children and a woman he claimed to have loved and was expecting his kid was brought up by him. The judge then sentenced Bendel to death for the murder and rape of 11-year-old Lacey, as well as the killings of 13-year-old John Paul, 11-year-old Connie, and 35-year-old Terry. Bendel received an order for his whole life. This implies that he won't ever be let out of jail. Regretfully, the probation officer who was in charge of writing Bendel's report performed their duties improperly. Even though Bendel was extremely dangerous and skilled at influencing people, they only paid attention to what he had to say. The officers just accepted Bendel's lies without questioning him or considering his lengthy criminal record. They would have realized how aggressive he had been both inside and outside of prison if they had done their research. Because they didn't do this, they would have noticed warnings concerning his treatment of his partners and the concern that he would harm children. They reported to the court that they did not believe Bendel posed a severe risk to his spouses or kids. As an alternative, they recommended that he be required to spend specific hours, usually at night, at home with Terry. To ensure he followed this rule, he would be required to wear an ankle bracelet. Peter Nieto, the senior coroner for Derby and Derbyshire, delivered a harsh critique of the state of the service, claiming that the victims had been let down by probation officers who were overworked, stressed, and inexperienced. After hearing 2 weeks of testimony, Mr. Nieto declared that although Bendall's case was handled by 2 probation officers in training with only months of experience between them, they lack the qualifications, experience, or training necessary to oversee the case. Terry's mother talked of her deep sorrow. She lost her sole child, a daughter, as well as her grandchildren. Angie talks about how much she valued her daughter and her grandchildren, and how she would do anything to see them for just a little while longer. John Paul and Lacey father, Jason Bennett, claimed that the killing of his 2 kids had ruined his life. He believes that thinking about the future hurts and that life right now seems meaningless. The big question remains, why did Damien Bendall commit such terrible murders? Sadly, he never explained why. Some think he was abusing his partner, Lacey, and wanted to silence her. Others believe he was anxious about becoming a dad. Was his drug use enough to trigger such violence, or was it just a fit of rage? Could these deaths have been prevented? Did authorities fail to act properly? How can the system be improved to stop similar tragedies? Damien Bendall's supervision while on probation was seriously flawed. The quality of work was extremely poor, below what the public expects and deserves.